Our livestock panelist at this week's Market Journal Roadshow was Iowa State Extension livestock economist Shane Ellis. Shane discussed margins for farmers and ranchers producing pork and beef and the current level of overall production. Through the first 10 months of the year, U.S. commercial beef production was 5% higher than the same time span in 2015, and the country's total pork output was up 1%. As Shane noted, those industries will need to find extra demand to help consume both meats. The foreign market has been brighter, with beef exports in September up 30% from a year ago, and pork shipments during the third quarter 5% higher than that period in 2015. We talked with Shane in Kearney and began by looking at the current levels of production.
Looking at where we've been, compared to what we were in the past and everything, we're producing beef at levels that we probably haven't done since like 2010, before the drought, really. I mean, we've really done a good job of that heifer retention and kind of moving things around. We're seeing that happen now with a number of cattle that are going into slaughter in our production. While our slaughter weights are a little bit lower, we're going to expect that to happen. We have a tremendous number of animals going into the market right now. USDA is looking at beef production up about 4.4% coming into the next year.
You said today one of the things that's going to have to happen is there's going to have to be more demand from somewhere. Let's talk about the international market. What have we seen so far?
Well, we've had a very good run so far in the last 5 years. We've seen beef exports of about 10% of what we've been producing. So while we were going through that period of producing less, we were actually still continuing to maintain some very strong exports during the time that our beef was the most expensive. Now, while our beef is getting a little bit cheaper, particularly at the live animal sector, we're hoping to find some additional markets for that. We're looking at maybe China being a potential rising market. That's a market that has been closed to U.S. beef since 2003. So 13 years later, we might be getting in there. That's kind of a growing market, huge population, lots of middle class folks that might have a taste for high quality U.S. beef.
Touch on pork. You mentioned today just how important or just how much we export each year. How important are those export markets?
We're quite dependent on our exports for the disappearance and utilization of the pork that we're producing. In the last 8 years, we've seen an increase in that exports of our pork. In the last 5 years, it's been between 20 and 22% of the pork that's produced in the United States has been exported. That's like all the pork produced in the whole state of Iowa, all dependent on being exported. If for some reason something were to happen to suddenly shut that down and all that were to come back on our market, we would see some catastrophic price drops out there, just because that's a lot of pork for us suddenly to have to consume back on this market. So we are very observant of what happens on those pork exports. It's a major portion of the demand that we are supplying.
We know when we talk about trade, the strength of the dollar comes into play. It's at its strongest mark or around that level in more than a decade. What do you think will happen here as we close out the year, factoring in a potential interest rate hike in December?
Well, it's usually very nice to be able to say, man, we got a good strong U.S. dollar, strong indication of where our standing in the world is and our economy's strong. But it tends to be a little bit of a wet towel for our exports, especially for the ag exports. And so we're going to see a little bit of pressure. It's not really a positive thing. If we have a weak U.S. dollar, cheapens up our export. Other countries say, hey, it's a bargain to buy U.S. products, particularly China. China is one of those that they love a bargain. So as the U.S. dollar does become stronger as we go through time, that's making our products more expensive to these other countries. It could be something, not saying it's going to shut it down or anything like that, but it's going to dampen or push back against any growth that we're hoping to see happen in the coming years.
I want to come full circle on this. We talked about production to start off with. Where do you think these industries, both pork and beef, are going in terms of expansion or contraction over the next couple of years?
On the pork side, I think these guys are going to continue to have a very controlled expansion. A lot of that has to do with just their efficiencies. They're constantly becoming more and more efficient. We're producing more pigs per litter, healthier pigs, growing faster, and we're doing a very good job with that. On the beef side of things, we'll see how profitability happens in the cow-calf sector. Right now, we're coming off of a period of 6 strong years of profitability, into a year of pretty low profitability now with 2016, and 17 might be the same thing happen again. We'll see how much of a dampener that is on the cow-calf sector, because that is the engine of the industry. You want to ramp up production, you got to get the cow-calf sector excited. we're suddenly seeing some of that excitement moving back out of that sector. A lot of folks are saying, you know, how can I expand things right now, because I need to sell every single heifer just to cover my costs. It's awful hard to grow that industry if you aren't continuing to see that heifer retention happening. What we retain right now for heifers, that doesn't turn into additional supply for another 2 years.
Regarding current inventory levels, the USDA is scheduled to release its next quarterly hogs and pigs report on December 23rd. On January 31st, it'll release its count of all cattle and calves in the country. It'll be the agency's only estimate on those numbers in a year.